Thanks for joining for this episode of the TechSpective Podcast. I have with me Sunil from ColorTokens. So Sunil, if you could introduce yourself, give a little bit of background.
Sure thing. Hey, Tony, thanks for having me. Great to be here. Yeah, at ColorTokens, I wear multiple hats, as you can imagine, but today my role is mostly focused on leading the marketing function and several of our growth initiatives, from partnerships to some of our federal initiatives and so on. Yeah, this has been an excellent ride for us, and looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Excuse me. Let's start with ColorTokens. From my perspective, is it's a newer. I wasn't that familiar previously. So, what is your focus? What is ColorTokens?
Got it. No, I think if you look at security in the last several years, or rather decades, right? I think it's gone through, not many shifts, if you will, right? So it's been focused on keeping the bad actors out for the most part, and protecting the enterprise or the organization and the network, assuming that everything internally is going to be safe and clean and so on. I think that paradigm has changed ever since the boundaries got blurred, right? So people started working from home, started using the cloud, etc. And keeping or actually distinguishing what is inside and outside started to become tougher, right? The line started to blur. And this is exactly what the attackers started to take advantage of, right? So there is easy way to get into an organization, and it's the real estate is so wide for an enterprise or a security team to manage. They're able to then from one point move to the other point, etc. So this is kind of the problem that we try to solve, which is just because somebody got into the network or the enterprise doesn't necessarily shouldn't lead to a crisis for the company, right? So we prevent the attacker from moving laterally, moving easily within the organization, and trying to prevent them from achieving whatever goal they have in mind, right? So that's really where ColorTokens came in. This whole concept of the category of security products fall under the category called Microsegmentation, and we are one of the leading vendors there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that all that seems fair. I mean, I've obviously worked in and followed the cybersecurity forever, longer than I care to admit, and I think I've talked many times in previous podcasts about the notion of moving from the kind of original OG castle and moat perimeter security to detection and response to where we are now, and I think the where we are now has taken into account both of those things. I think initially it was, okay, well, there's an inside and an outside, there's an us and a them, and we just need to protect the wall. And as that kind of broke down, it shifted to this mindset of, okay, well, everyone's going to get in. We just need to detect and respond faster, better, which seems legitimate. Right. And I think now it kind of is kind of meshing those two together and becoming something, evolving to be something more. Right. Say, look, by all means, do what you can to protect the perimeter to the extent the perimeter exists. It's just that the perimeter now is like at the individual level, at the application level, like that's the perimeter. It's not like out there somewhere. In looking at ColorTokens, like the website and stuff, I know one of the terms that is used and that you guys refer to is this concept of breach readiness. So, describe for us, like what does that mean for given today's threat landscape?
Yeah, I think, Tony, I think the approach to security has evolved in the last few years as well, right? So I think there is the reactive portion where you had this AV kind of a model where you were only looking for signatures of the bad and everything else you let through. And then you had no defense beyond that. And getting past that was easy because you just had to create a new virus, right? The second phase came where the detection and response became critical, because when things get into the organization that you don't previously recognize, the best thing to do is detect and respond to them as close to real time as possible. The new approach is this whole proactive approach, or in other terms, the phrase that's overused today is zero trust approach, right? What does the word zero trust or proactive, they all mean that you have to make certain assumptions, and if that assumption is that you are either already breached or that you will eventually be breached. So if you take that approach, your policies, your enterprise security architecture, they will all take a certain direction, right? That is far more proactive in nature. It'll be a little bit more predictive. It'll try to, look for, weaknesses a little bit more proactively and so on. So this is where we see the convergence, and this is where the world is going. The detection and response and all the previous capabilities will remain, but the approach to security is going to shift more towards zero trust and the proactive way of doing security.
Okay. That makes sense. And along the lines of what I mentioned earlier, in that sort of that evolution from perimeter security to endpoint detection and response and et cetera. There has been that evolution, and one of the things you guys focus on, and I think this is comes back to what you talked about with the microsegmentation, is just again, I feel like the philosophy has been attacks are going to get through,
right.
and I've seen some pushback on that over the years, where people are like, well, that's a little defeatist. And it's like, well,
right.
Yes, but it's also realist.
Right.
It's like you have to admit that there's a good chance that an attack is going to get through, and to not admit that would be, I think, naive.
Yeah.
But within that, to say, okay, so let's assume something is going to get through. At that point, it becomes, how do I limit the blast radius? How do I make sure
exactly
that only that application or only that endpoint or only that individual is impacted and it doesn't spread throughout the company?
Right. Yeah.
So with that, can you walk through, like, I guess for someone who doesn't know, like, how does that lateral movement generally happen in an attack?
Yeah.
And what are you doing, like, with ColorTokens, X-Shield and microsegmentation? Like, how are you disrupting that process?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the point that you made earlier about, just being in denial, right? And this is really what we used to kind of face probably about 4 or 5 years ago, when we were getting out of stealth mode and starting to, talk to customers, etc. But the good news is, I think more and more security leaders that we speak to, a majority portion of them have made that leap, right? That awareness and the acceptance that the breach is eventually going to happen is becoming real in their minds. The reason, again, for that is, the investments in cybersecurity has only gone up in the last few years, right? It's closer to $250 billion today as an overall market. But the breaches have gone up faster than that, right? The losses from breaches continue to go up. So the more you invest in cybersecurity, you would expect that to be in the opposite direction, but that's not happening. So cybersecurity leaders today are accepting that breaches will happen, right? So that's a good news for us. Now, the whole concept of lateral movement that ColorTokens works really hard to kind of prevent the unauthorized lateral movement stems from that whole idea that when the breaches happen, the initial access is not necessarily the biggest problem for an organization, right? Gaining that initial foothold or access to the network is increasingly easy, right? You could buy credentials off the dark web, for dollars, if you will. You could, run some phishing campaigns. You'll definitely get a certain number of, hits for that. These things happen all the time. So the question really is, for an attacker, once they gain that initial access, which the barrier is pretty low today, what do they have to do? What is their end goal here, right? The end goal is for them to get to the systems that matter, right? Think of somebody, a thief entering a home, for example. Once they enter the home, they have to get to where the jewels are kept, right? So you're trying to get to the safe. And they need to do that in a way that avoids detection. First of all, if a thief gets into the house, they already know that they have to avoid creaky floors. They have to kind of, not knock over things and, cause some noise, etc. They have to avoid detection. That is given, but they also need to now know where the safe is before they get to the safe. So to do that, they have to do a whole bunch of recon, right? So they have to figure out, there are lots of tools, right? And you don't even have to bring your own tools. There are tools within the network. This is living off the land, so to say, right? You could even use PowerShell, you could use Netstat, you could get any tool that's already there to do the recon. Once you do the recon, you now need to start moving from one system to the other, right? And to do that, you need privileges. You need to escalate privileges, or you already have privileges, or you need to hijack some sessions already in the network, or you have to do some key logging, get some additional credentials, do some internal spear phishing. You could do any of those different techniques to start moving laterally and continue to look for the crown jewels within the organization. This is what lateral movement is, right? And once the attacker gets to that end state, which is the crown jewels, it's already too late for the organization. Because once they're there, they can do one of many things, right? I mean, you've heard of ransomware, that's the most common thing. Or they could just plain steal your data, that's data exfiltration. They could just corrupt the data, disrupt your business, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a very, very late situation already. What the organization should do is focus on the lateral movement, right? Of course, you should try to keep the attacker out. That's where you stop the breach. Right. But post-breach, you got to prevent it from spreading. And that's where ColorTokens focuses on.
Right. You said when you're talking about using the existing tools and living off the land, and that's a thing an attacker can do. I think in my head, I would go a step further and say it's what an attacker would prefer to do.
Absolutely.
Because it's not going to raise red flags the way, if you bring in something external, like, the network is used to seeing its own tools. So you're going to fly under the radar easier if you just use tools that already exist in the network and just say, okay, well, just give me all the information you can.
Exactly. I think post initial access, the only critical thing for them is to establish some persistence, right? I mean, how do you establish some command and control kind of mechanism where you can stay within the network, for a longer time? The more time you have, the more damage you can do. So that persistence is important. And once they figure out how to do that, they have all the time in the world. They can stay under the radar for the longest time, don't have to do anything, trip any wires, and get to really the critical parts of your network very quick, in a very undetected manner. You're absolutely right.
One of the other areas that I think is, not that I think, but that has blurred in recent years is IT, OT, and kind of pulling the whole ecosystem together. I think, there's been plenty of discussion over the years of how once upon a time OT was much more, air gapped and it was a totally separate thing and it had nothing to do with your network. And but now it's like more and more, support personnel want the ability to monitor what's going on, right, or they want the ability to, be able to take action remotely on things that are going on. And to do that, they need the network connectivity. And it's just another example of like everything that makes your life easier or more convenient also makes it easier for attackers. Like everything that makes your life easy and convenient is an attack vector. And so as we've done that, it's like, yes, it makes it much easier to, operate, troubleshoot, monitor, maintain OT networks, but it also exposes them to all of the, similar risks as the IT side. That said, the OT environment is also very unique from the IT environment, and then a lot of those things don't have any UI. They don't have any. A lot of those things don't have any way to update them. You can't just install endpoint protection or whatever. So from your perspective, from ColorTokens perspective, and the ability to do microsegmentation, how does that, how does that convergence impact you, and how are you able to kind of see and protect both of these things at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, right? So I think in the IT OT convergence, or some might call it digital transformation, et cetera. I mean, this is different terms for the same thing. It's like a perfect storm, right? To your point, there are more IoT devices and OT devices than before. That's number one, right? I mean, if you're a trucking company, you're attaching IoT device to your trucking company, to your truck, so to say, to track their movement and all of those things. So there's more devices that are joining the network on an ongoing basis. The second thing is the convergence portion. So as you mentioned, things that were kept separate before are now getting together. The reason for that is, the more of the data that gets transferred between the IoT and OT environment, the better, right? Because the transformation, the digital transformation and the modernization of the factories, et cetera, is happening because these IoT and OT machines are feeding the data analytics engines on the IT side. These things are coming up with some decisions and pushing it back onto the IT and the IoT and the OT world. So that's the convergence. So now the data is going back and forth, right? And the data then needs to the data movement basically means that the network actually has to be connected between them, right? And which also means that the risks are now getting transferred between the left and the right, right? So this is the second big element to the storm, so to say. And then the third element is that most of the security of the OT environment was not the concern of the cybersecurity team before, right? It was managed by a different organization. This was the plant manager. It could be the operations head, et cetera. They never had to manage this before, right? And these are traditionally known to be insecure environments, right? The protocols that you're used to in the OT world, like the Modbus, Telnet, Profinet, all of these were never designed with security in mind, right? And they don't even have basic encryption, integrity checks, nothing, right? They were just built for device-to-device communication. And now these protocols have to now become IP at some layer in the Purdue model, probably level 2, level 3 and above. And then they are now getting connected with the IT world. So the disconnected and insecure world is now connecting with the world that, and then the IT leaders have to now manage this that they never used to. So this is what is causing significant problems with the convergence, right? So that is kind of the problem definition, right? What that means for ColorTokens as a company, that we recognized this several years ago, and we started to build a solution that, again, expands the platform in a way that, the IT leaders who are used to kind of the tools that they used on the IT side are easily able to kind of adapt them to the IoT and the OT environment. So that was one of the driving principles or the design principles for us. It should be applicable. They should be able to use the standardization tools and the jargon, et cetera, that they used to, right? So that's number one. The second thing, as you mentioned, these you can't just take an agent and deploy it on an OT device. These are locked systems. Sometimes they are non-OS systems, right? There's nothing to run on them, right? Embedded systems, et cetera. So the solution, however, under the hood, right, has to be different. Although the layer on top needs to provide that abstraction and ease of use. So that was a second guiding principle for us. Like, how do we, in a non-disruptive manner, provide security for the OT and the IoT world and make it easy for one team to manage it all and provide that one singular view. So ColorTokens then kind of expanded the platform to have an agentless approach for the OT and the IoT world, right? And we have technology that now translates or elevates the IoT and the OT assets to the same level as the IT assets in the view of the cybersecurity team. They all look the same in the sense they're all on the same single screen. You can see how things are connected to each other, how they're talking to the IT world, how data is getting transferred between one to the other and between them, etc. So we've created this one view and one policy framework on top of it, which means that you can apply the same kind of policies from a user level that gets then translated to the policies that get implemented at the device level, et cetera, down at the OT and the factory. and all do it centrally, right? So this is what ColorTokens has done within this convergence space to bring that kind of level of usability and security to the two worlds.
Okay. I'm going to go back a little bit to the concept of breach readiness, and in the context of one of the other things that has kind of sprung into the vocabulary is resilience. I mean, it's one of those words that's been there forever, but
Absolutely.
Now all of a sudden everyone is talking about cyber resilience, and which is important. I mean, so it really ties back into what we already talked about in terms of, okay, an attack is going to get through. Yes, you want to be able to detect and respond as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. You also want to limit the blast radius, and then the resilience piece adds another layer that says, and we want to continue operations as normally as possible, as quickly as possible, and be able to still conduct business through the attack. With that in mind, can you talk about, like how does microsegmentation and what ColorTokens brings to the table, how does that help an organization maintain continuity and have cyber resilience?
That's I think you're touching a very important point here. So we came up with this Be Breach Ready tagline with that very specific goal, right? So if you think of a business, the goal of a business at the end of the day is to make money, right? It's very simple as that. Now, cybersecurity, the role of the cybersecurity of the CISO, for example, is to align with that goal, right? So what do you need to do as a cybersecurity function to ensure that business continues, right? Despite a breach. So that's the part that we are adding now, right? Saying that despite a breach, it is not when things are nice and sunny. It is despite having some disruption, something happening to your network, some adversary trying to really get into your network and cause some problems for you. How do you, as a cybersecurity team, defend the organization while continuing to run your business at whatever percentage of the original or the baseline you want to keep? And different organizations have different numbers, right? You could say 30% digital resiliency. That means I'll keep 30% of my operations running, or it could be much higher, 80%, for example. Now, the cyber leader can never decouple the business goal from their goals, right? So they have to focus on what is that I'm trying to achieve for the organization, because your investments and your strategy will all be aligned with the business goal, right? As long as the business leader is able to make that case to the CEO, to the board, etc., they're very happy to get the funding, right? So they will get the funding, and we've seen the most sophisticated CISOs are capable of making that technical translation to business jargon, saying, this is the business goal, to support it, I'm able to, I would need this kind of investment in these areas, and I can show you why, right? So breach readiness basically means continuing your digital operations, in an adverse environment, adverse situation, right? And in order to do that, of course, the cyber leader needs to have certain tools. They need to have visibility into what's happening in the organization. They need to understand the business. They need to know, for example, if one part of the organization or one application is more important, one asset is more important than the other. That's, two, again, in the context of running the business. It's always that. For a hospital, this could be an MRI machine, for example, or it could be the Epic systems, right? Or the Cerner systems, the EMR systems that they have. 50-60% of the revenue flows through them. If you're worried about business continuity and digital resilience, these are the systems to protect. Yes, a nurse's station, you want to make sure they don't get impacted, but the impact of a nurse's station versus, let's say an Epic server going down are two very different impact on the digital resiliency goal that you have, right? And that is really the more sophisticated CISOs generally think risk appropriate security policies, right? And business appropriate policies, right? So these are the conversations that we have with our end customers when we deploy microsegmentation, because You need to know that. And we help them also know that as well, because we provide significant visibility for their assets and traffic and their own businesses when we get into an organization.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think all of that makes sense. So one of the other things that is, it went up and then it kind of faded away, and now it has had a resurgence, is the notion of zero trust. I think, I want to say it's kind of a post-pandemic thing. I think the shift to remote work during the pandemic, I think, brought it back to the forefront and saying, okay, well, how do we protect better? So a lot of organizations are focused on trying to implement their interpretation of zero trust. And I say that because I feel like there's different definitions and interpretations depending on who you are. Because it's a little bit of a buzzword, but the concept is pretty, I think everyone kind of agrees on the concept. So what is in your mind, what's the relationship between microsegmentation and zero trust?
Got it. Yeah. I think the key part in the zero trust jargon is the missing letter in the middle, right? So basically what it means, what it's supposed to mean is zero implicit trust, right? And I think that acronym doesn't sound very nice if you actually try to do that. I think we dropped the word in the middle. But zero implicit trust basically means that, if you look at trust, I mean, when you and I are talking, when we meet in the real world, we establish trust between us, right? It's a very human emotion, so to say. But you can't just translate that into the digital world. If you try to do that, that's when actually, it becomes a significant source of vulnerability. What do I mean by that? If you take the zero trust concept, one of the things it says is that you have to assume you're breached. You have to assume the network or the device that you believe is on your network is as compromised as a device on the internet, for example. If that's one of the things you assume, how would you write policies? How would you check every time there's a connection request coming in from this other system? How will you inspect? How do you check, etc.? So be extremely careful in making that implicit trust assumption when you're making these, when you're allowing access or granting access to any critical assets, right? So that's where zero trust became popular in this kind of, distributed world and, dissolved boundary world. And as you rightly said, the pandemic actually made that even, made that awareness go up, because now people are really distributed. You had to provide them access from their own laptops that they probably didn't even have. They were not even given corporate devices, at the initial stages, and they would have to log in. Business had to continue, right? The digital resiliency had to happen, right? So when you're trying to do that, you have to figure out alternative ways to say, I'm still going to trust this person and this laptop, or, I still have to let them connect to the network, but I have to do it securely. That's where the whole zero trust network access and, that capability or that category of products took off. And then the awareness of zero trust started to come back up again, right? It has been in theory for the last 15, 20 years probably, but I think the pandemic kind of made it real, right? If you look at NIST or CISA, they will talk about zero trust in several different, pillars, and one of them is the access pillar, right? So that became very prominent during the pandemic. The other pillars are, you could talk about the identity pillar, there's the network pillar, there's the data pillar, and so on and so forth, right? So we fall ColorTokens, the microsegmentation, it generally, in people's mind, it kind of falls somewhere in the network or the application pillar, right? So microsegmentation takes the philosophy of zero trust, which is don't assume that there is, good things and bad things. There is no distinction. You have to always assume something is compromised. How do you ensure that you actually proactively reduce the attack surface? Only let, if you only go down the path of safe listing certain traffic, you assume everything else is, happening, should by default be denied. That's another philosophy of zero trust, right? Default deny. So if you start with the basic assumption that, hey, I'm not going to let every device talk to every device on my network, I'll make sure that my business applications talk exactly the way I want them to, and every other communication is default deny. That's exactly what microsegmentation and products like ColorTokens X Shield does, right? So That's the area where you see kind of zero trust being applied to the network. That's what microsegmentation is, right? The definition that's where they merge.
Right.
But also it didn't. But applying microsegmentation to the network also comes with its own challenges, and we can get into it if there's time on this call.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, so first, to your point about the missing word in the middle, I had a conversation years ago with my friend Sam Curry, who's a CISO at Zscaler, and he had emphasized, he was like, well, there's no such thing. There's not really any such thing as zero trust. Like, if there's zero trust, nothing happens.
Exactly.
Like, there has to be trust.
Exactly.
So it's like it's kind of a misnomer. The whole thing is misnamed from the get-go because there has to be trust. Now we can say we're doing additional steps to validate that trust or whatever, but
exactly.
the trust is still there. Otherwise, there's no communication and nothing happens. And then the other thing I was going to say is, as you were kind of describing it, it reminded me about, so I served in the Air Force. At once upon a time, I had a security clearance, and the thing is, you get your security clearance, and you think, okay, well, I have top secret security clearance, so I can see top secret things. It's like, well, yes, that's technically true, but there's another element that most people don't talk about, and a lot of people maybe are not even aware of, which is need to know.
Exactly.
Just because you have top secret security clearance doesn't mean you can look at all the top secret security stuff. Like, you have to have a need to know. And I feel like that's kind of a parallel for what we're talking about when you're talking about like device to device and application to device within your network. It's like, okay, well, in theory, I'm probably okay with these things talking to each other.
Right.
It's probably fine. But is there a need to know? Like, do they need to talk to each other?
Exactly.
Like, that's the key piece to kind of consider, because when you don't consider it, that's how attackers then exploit that weakness. If you just assume, oh, well, if this device is talking to that device, that's fine because they're both inside my network. That's how an attacker moves laterally without you knowing anything.
Correct. I think that's a fantastic analogy, right? The need to know, and establishing also establishing your clearance one time, yes, but constantly verifying that Tony is really Tony every time. Those are the things I think when you translate it, those are kind of the fundamental underlying principles of zero trust, right? But then comes the question of, do people know? That's where microsegmentation. Do people know whether systems should be talking to each other, right? How do they have that knowledge? How do they gain that visibility? That's where the adoption challenges came about for microsegmentation, right? Because you might have systems that somebody set up maybe 10 years ago, they're no longer in the company, and you don't know, should that even be talking to the SMB server that we have there, right? Should that be talking to AD? And why are all these ports open? Or what ports are open, right? Even on a particular server. These are the challenges that initially kind of prevented microsegmentation from becoming, and even to this day, we're probably looking at under 10% of adoption, right? If you look at organizations who are using a firewall, I would like to argue that every organization in the world should next be thinking about, or rather even in parallel be thinking about microsegmentation. But we're nowhere close to that level of adoption because of this knowledge gap. And solving that as a product category, the whole industry had to solve that problem before this kind of mass adoption takes place. So the crossing the chasm hasn't happened yet for the category as a whole. And one of the key things that we focus as a company is to eliminate or make it solve this very specific problem. How do you make microsegmentation more broadly adopted, right?
Right. Well, it's interesting kind of that it isn't more widely adopted, or that it's a thing that needs to be educated so much and really like sold to people, because the concept is very similar to if you're in an office building or if you're in an apartment building, every door is a fire door. We know on a physical level, or you take a ship or a submarine, those doors compartmentalized so that if there's a breach in the hull that lets water into the ship, you can just shut the door and just let the water into that part of the ship, and then the rest of the ship is fine because you've limited the blast radius of that problem. And the same thing with the fire. Like the idea would be, okay, well, I'm going to shut this fire door, so the fire is going to be contained right here in this little area of this floor, and it's not going to take out the whole building. We're just talking about taking those same concepts and applying them on a digital level to say, hey, if something goes wrong over here on this machine, it shouldn't be able to just spread across the whole company.
Correct. No, I think the examples that you gave are, what we generally consider secure by design, or segmented by design, if you will, right? They made certain assumption, right? The ships made the assumption that, there is going to be a breach somewhere. I'm going to, have a leak or something. Water's going to start flowing in. I don't want the ship to go down. So they were designed with that assumption. And that's really what Zero Trust is making organizations do, right? To think, hey, assume that you're going to get breached. Now, the challenge, however, in the digital world is that if you haven't designed from the ground up, with that assumption, how do you retroactively put a segmentation tool in place, right? That is the adoption challenge, and the biggest fear, just going back to your earlier question on, resiliency and so on, or continuity, right? Business continuity. This is the other end of it, where security teams are worried if they are going to enforce some policy. Am I going to bring down the business? Am I going to disrupt some business line or a business or a production or a factory or something just because I made a wrong call, right? And so deep granular visibility is very important. Having the ability to test policies before you enforce them, having the ability to take a policy and, retroactively put it on, the last 1 month, maybe 1 years of traffic data is important. These are the capabilities that are required to be able to give that confidence to the security team, saying, hey, you can adopt, you can also do microsegmentation without, the fear of disruption, and you can go about it progressive in an incremental manner, right? You don't have to do all or nothing. You can pick a few servers to start with and go all the way to the OT assets. Even for those few servers you pick, you can only pick a few ports if you want to start with, and just make sure you just shut down the RDP or the SSH port first, because most of these admin ports and the high privilege ports are the most leveraged in a lateral movement kind of scenario. And then progressively go to the application level ports and protocols and so on, right? So this is really what was missing in products in the category that we have tried to also kind of ensure that over time we've learned this from lots of trials and tests within our platform to figure out why, and why is that fear, and what do we need to do from a technology standpoint to provide them that confidence and the tools they need to get that confidence.
Yeah. We have, I don't know, we're basically a week or so, a week out from RSAC, and everyone's going to be descending upon San Francisco to talk about cybersecurity. Do you have any particular announcements, messaging, presentations you're going to be doing at RSA?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think RSA is, it's incredibly difficult for a vendor to stand out. As you can imagine, 2-3 years ago, it was all Zero Trust. I'm pretty sure last year, and this year is always going to be about AI and things like that. What really, however, we want to stay focused is really the whole notion of, being breach ready, right? So that is really what we will double down on. This was a tagline that we started last year, and the brand promise of ColorTokens, right? So this year, there'll be a couple of different things that we'll be doing, but all within that realm of being breach ready. And the second big thing we'll talk about is the adoption portion of microsegmentation. How do you deploy, in across your organization, microsegmentation? You cannot leave certain doors and windows open. You really have to protect your full real estate, right? So how do you do microsegmentation? What is the journey to microsegmentation from wall to wall perspective? That'll be another theme for us. And how do you do it in a non-disruptive manner, in an agentless manner? How do you use the tools that you already have? It could be your EDR, it could be a SIM, etc. How do you leverage the investments today to actually deploy microsegmentation, right? So that's going to be another big theme for us. And then the third theme is going to be all around the identity company that we acquired last year, Pure ID. Pure ID is changing the whole passwordless security, upside down. Fantastic solution, and we've seen significant adoption of Pure ID within our customer base, within ColorTokens customer base, and independently as well. So identity is going to be a big theme for us, and we're very excited that all of our partners, from the OT world, all of our system integrators, channel partners, they're all going to be at our booth doing various talks and and presentations and demos. And we would love for your audience to stop by if they're at RSA.
All right. Do you know the booth number? And if not, I can get it later, and I'll make sure I publish it with the podcast.
I should know this. I think it's booth 2027. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, I will double check that and make sure I include a reference to that. All right. So covered RSA. I have one kind of like wrap up question, which is and it doesn't necessarily have to be a quick wrap up because it's a big question.
Sure.
Given kind of current events and trends, and this is specifically relating to generative AI going into agentic AI, and that how that impacts the both the attack surface and the threats that we have to deal with, and just I guess the current trends in attacks. How do you see those? What does the future look like? Fast forward a year, 2 years. How does that impact microsegmentation or breach readiness, and what should we be thinking about?
Yeah, no, I think we're not trying to pivot heavily, from the original brand promise, right? So it's still very, very relevant in the AI world as well. And what's going to happen, one of the significant things that's going to happen is that it's going to be very, very easy for an attacker to do any kind of recon work and social engineering work on an organization and the employees. That's going to be, personas can be created easily. They could be, you could create, Tony Bradley as a persona. You could do a whole lot of research. You could, it can generate a digital twin for you very quickly, right? So now spoofing an identity is getting easier and easier, right? So one of the things that we focus on, especially with the acquisition of Pure ID, is the fact that we want to prevent, we want to build a system that's anti-phishing, right? So the anti-phishing is a big deal in the AI world for us, and that'll be a big theme during our, you will see that coming out from ColorTokens in the next, coming months and so on. The other aspect of AI is the ability to get the human out of the loop, right? So if you're talking about agentic workflows, the non-human identities become more important as well, right? How do you secure, your service accounts, your system accounts, your agent-to-agent communication, etc.? So that's another big focus area for ColorTokens, both from a microsegmentation perspective and from a non-human identity perspective. Okay, and then the third focus areas, just to wrap things up, is AI models are usually built in the cloud today, right? We believe some element of that will move to, and then on-device kind of model. But today the focus is more cloud adoption is being driven by AI workloads, and cloud security is again very different from your data center or your OT security, as you can imagine, right? So cloud is all about APIs, cloud is all about PaaS services and identity-based segmentation. So a significant portion of our investments are about cloud security and AI workload security.
Okay. All right. I think that is a great overview of both the challenge and the solution and what ColorTokens does. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me, and I'll like leave it to you to, if you have any kind of closing thoughts or parting words, but thank you for taking the time to join me.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I think thanks for this opportunity. I think my only message is going to be, just don't be afraid to, get into microsegmentation. It's, come talk to us. We will show you that it's not going to bite. It is something that every organization should do. And we've made it incredibly easy to adopt and, take a gradual approach if you need, or a quick, wall-to-wall implementation as well. And we have significant, large system integrators who are certified to help large organizations deploy our platform as well. So we look forward to helping anyone who's interested. And thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. Great conversation.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Cheers.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow at TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.